Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Guns Akimbo from 2019. There's both a lot to talk about with this film and very little to talk about all at the same time, because I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are not directly about this film, because the movie itself I don't have a huge amount to say about. But I think everything that's surrounding it is interesting, or at least worth discussing. This movie, I think most people were not aware of and have not seen, but a lot of people, there was a surprising amount of viral marketing around it, whether intentional or unintentional, due to a picture that released when it was in production. So I don't remember exactly when it came out. My memory says it was actually several years before the movie was anywhere near release. A picture circulated on the internet of Daniel Radcliffe, who was the main character of this, or the primary actor playing the main character on this movie, in like a whatever you would call it, a production, a spy shot on a production set or something. A picture of him holding two guns in a bathrobe and like fuzzy slippers. And this got a lot of like circulation on the internet. This was at a period where, Harry Potter was enough in the background that people were aware that Daniel Radcliffe still had a career to some extent, he was not, relegated to only being Harry Potter, but like still he had not had a ton of roles following the end of the Harry Potter series. Now, I really like Daniel Radcliffe. I think in interviews he seems to be a very somebody who's kind of wise beyond his years and like very aware of the role that he's had in culture, and he's a socially conscious individual. I also really like him as an actor. I think he's generally very talented, and while he hasn't had a huge amount of roles to really shine in recently, there's been enough either small roles or niche roles that have shown to me that he has genuine talent. He's not just a continuation of some, face that got an early casting as a child actor and like is writing that out. He genuinely seems to be, a reasonably well balanced individual with some genuine talent. So that picture, whether it was intentionally leaked or unintentionally, worked on me, because it's just so weird to look at that you have to at least ask, okay, what's that about? And because I also enjoy Daniel Radcliffe's work, I figured I had to find out about it at some point too. Now, I didn't have high hopes. It looks absurd, right? And the highest expectations I had were it would be like a little kind of clever, kind of funny, probably kind of a moderate action film, not a lot more. However, I should have seen the warning signs immediately because one of the first things that flashes on screen when you start this film is that it's produced by Saban Films. Now, we're not going to delve into Saban, but I have a lot of thoughts about Saban, and there's a lot of background on Saban as a production company that no longer exists. I should mention Saban. I did some digging. Saban Entertainment no longer exists. Saban, there's now a group called Saban Capital Group, which owns Saban Films, and they don't appear to be basically in the business of heavily producing things anymore. They're basically just they're literally called an investment firm, which kind of makes sense, because I encourage you to go read up on the history of Saban. Saban has been like a tumor on the media industry for like 45 years, maybe more. And it's not that they never did anything right. But their business practices are largely very they have skirted the edge of the law a lot in terms of questionable acquisition of material, questionable repurposing, really shady business deals with some iffy agreements behind them. And I'm not going to unpack that all here. But the Saban name is dirty to me. And I have never seen Saban's name on a film before. Other than something that was like already associated with them, like Power Rangers or Digimon or one of a couple of other things they're particularly well known for. So Saban films throw up red flags, not necessarily like fair ones, but ones that made me go, oh no. Are we about to have some like real low budget cheesy shit? Like just cash grabbing all the way. And the answer is no, but it's not as no as I want it to be. Because this movie's production is cheap. It is not without any talent or finesse, but it does not look great. It looks inexpensive and corner cutty a lot. And I appreciate that the money they appear to have spent does seem to have been in some quality casting and budgeting for actors, because the thing that's best about this film are a variety of different actors. Daniel Radcliffe is pretty great. Samara Weaving is pretty great. There's a whole bunch of more minor characters played by a variety of probably not I wouldn't say necessarily notable, but like recognizable faces if you're watching a lot of movies and a lot of TV, and just some good casting all around and some decent acting. But the production looks bad. There's a lot of CG. There's a lot of green screening. And if you've ever watched a more modern Saban live action production, it has some parallels that I cannot necessarily accuse them of, because I don't know. My impression is that this movie was basically finished by the time Saban had any hand in acquiring the rights for it. I think they basically just did distribution. But there are some parallels in terms of like cheesy, crappy green screening and low budget effects and all these other things that I could not differentiate what was incidental and what was, oh, Saban's back at it again. And it's a little blurry as well, because this movie is intentionally cheesy. It's intentionally over the top. The premise is ridiculous. But that doesn't necessarily excuse cheapness over like the reality of cheapness versus the appearance of cheapness, the deliberate choice that can be made to lessen the quality or use an appearance of cheapness for artistic intention. It's a little hard to differentiate how much is what here, but I don't think it's fully one or the other. The actual content of this movie is thin, very limited, pretty uninspired, and very much something I've seen before. And the only unique aspects really are Daniel Radcliffe with guns in his hands. That's really what we're looking at here. Because everything else about it is something I've seen before. So I'm going to talk more about this film, and I'm not going to go into explicit plot spoilers. But I am not gonna dance around this too much either because I want to relate this to a bunch of other films. The first the first thing this or the first movie I related this to was a film from 2016 called Nerve, which is also not a good film. Um, but it's with Emma Roberts and Dave Franco, and it's cheesy and it's poorly produced, and the premise is ridiculous. But the parallels are pretty obvious. The setup is more or less the same. You've got a main character who's watching underground live stream of some kind, and then gets wrapped up in it in some fashion and becomes a participant, willing or unwilling. And the parallels throughout the film are very apparent. I'm not going to accuse anybody for any of the things I'm about to talk about of like stealing or even cribbing necessarily. It's impossible to say who's inspired by what, and inspiration is, an important part of progressing media. But honestly, in a lot of ways, where Nerve feels like it's targeted more at a female audience, this feels like if you took Nerve and made it more for the gritty dude bro action crowd. I would probably argue that Nerve, well, I don't know. They both have their ups and downs. Nerve might be the better film, but neither of them are particularly good. And this one definitely leans very much harder into the action, overly stylish action, abject violence, lots of blood splatter, lots of very aggressive and straight on views of violence, not in a way that makes you want to shy away or find it gross, just a kind of way that it's this is getting cartoony, very cartoony, more cartoony than it's already deliberately trying to be. But I also couldn't help comparing it to a couple of other films. One of them is Ready or Not, which I talked about quite some time ago, a movie that I watched that has Samara Weaving as the lead role. A movie that I was kind of middling on, but it's a vastly better film than this one that has, a comedic tone and the use of a lot of very aggressive violence and overt, depictions thereof, but understands its own tone better and sort of rides the certain line between absurdity and seriousness as to be fun and to keep its own pacing really well. Guns Akimbo, by comparison, kind of up and down. Kind of can't always decide how goofy it's being, can't decide how cartoonish it's being, or how just overtly gruesome. The scene, the first scene that really was did we need to do this, was when Daniel Radcliffe first gets his guns. I'm not going to talk about it any more than that, other than just to say it's the process of doing that is so needlessly gruesome that it completely shatters the tone that the movie has up to that point, and kind of makes you forget everything that you were looking at up to then, because it feels like such a sea change that you're worried that the rest of the movie you're about to watch is just going to be bordering on a Saw sequel or spinoff or something like that. It's just weirdly violent. And there's a couple other scenes in this movie that also have that same thing of just why are we suddenly here? Why are we doing this? Why is this so aggressive? So while Ready or Not is a better performance by Samara Weaving, although she does the best she can with this one, that one also is so much better in so many other things that it does in parallel. This sort of battle royale style, up and down paces of violence thing, everything about that movie handles itself better than this one. Another film, Free Guy, which I don't think I did a video on. I'm pretty sure I didn't. I'm pretty sure I watched it and then said there's no way I can do a video on this, because that movie just sucks. It's I'm sorry. Like, there's no redeeming qualities about it. It is intellectually offensive. It rides on an already outdated at the time that it came out, like level of meme culture and just bad jokes that amount to like wink wink nudge nudge, do you get the joke? We have this shared cultural language, don't we? Haha. And then like over the top cartoony action comedy that doesn't is not impactful in any way. And in the moments where this movie, Guns Akimbo, slides too far into the like cartoony and video game references and shit, that's when I was going, oh god, it's like Free Guy. And they're few and far between enough that it doesn't like completely ruin the film just on its own doing that, but it sure doesn't help. Whether you've seen Free Guy or not, and whether you liked Free Guy or not, I don't think it has a positive effect, and I think you'll still notice it whether you've seen it or not. And the overall arc of this film, I swear there was another movie I wanted to talk about, but now I can't remember it. The overall arc of this film is like so thin that actually any of those three films have a more concise and deliberate plot than this one does, where Guns Akimbo feels like at times it just comes to a full stop to do a scene that it wanted to do because it thinks the scene is funny, and then just leaps back into something else, a completely different tone. And as I'm talking about it, I'm actually liking it even less than I already didn't like it that much, because there's a few scenes in here that are genuinely pretty great that I really enjoyed, and everything else but those scenes don't work in the context they're supposed to be working. They only work on their own as a standalone, or they work better that way, and like the overall context is lost, meaningless, kind of has no point. The reveal of what the very thin plot is going to be, that any like secondary arcs beyond just get yourself out of this situation, which is the obvious one that's present, show up and are resolved with little to no impact and little care for any kind of pacing or the impact on the story itself, or the impact on the tone or the emotion that you feel about any of the characters. And while everybody in this production is doing their best to do a good acting job, and some of them are genuinely very good, the pacing, the scripting, all of this other stuff just does not deliver a cohesive narrative. And I don't think, because of the production problems, it delivers a particularly entertaining visual either. Some of the scenes, there's a lot of like extended action scenes. And this is the other thing I was going to talk about. Not a direct relation, but because I've just recently watched a bunch of the John Wick films, it is put in even more stark contrast how terrible the reasons and manner of the violence in this film happens for. They even do a few things that seem kind of interesting, like they put bullet counters on Daniel Radcliffe's guns, so it's like something to trace, like how many bullets does he have left to get his job done. But it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. And when these extended choreography scenes are 100% style and 0% substance, when the when any scene's enemies are either there to completely obliterate our protagonist or protagonists, or be completely obliterated by them, it's not interesting. An action scene needs a give and take. It needs a genuine sense of like a dilemma or a sense of a threat. And every scene that you enter has a very obvious outcome the second you enter it. You know what the scene is about to be. You know that, oh, this is just a room of guys to get gunned down, or these are a bunch of guys who are going to commit completely absurd violence against our characters in order for them to. I'm gesturing with my hands because I can't even come up with a thing. It's usually the kind of thing where, you know, your protagonist gets beaten down and then they get something out of it. They like learn something, or they change what they're doing or something like that. No, it's just watching people get beaten. So like the action itself has little reason to exist. Also isn't that compelling in terms of the way it's produced and the choreography therein. And then there's just like multiple times throughout this film where I went, but this movie should already be done. Because this scene should have resulted in several deaths, or resulted in several deaths that shouldn't have. And the only reason they did that is because they wanted the movie to continue. And listen, like I recognize that's not the easiest thing to write, but it's not the hardest either. If you write a scene of violence that has an obvious conclusion that can be drawn somewhere in the beginning to middle of it, and the presumably somewhat rational actors within the scene are not taking the obvious, like, oh, I could just shoot them here and the movie would be over and my arc, my, you know, narrative would be done. If the only reason that doesn't happen is so that the movie can continue, if you do it once, it doesn't look good. If you do it like 5 times, it becomes absurd and takes you out of the film and reminds you that it is a film and it is a crappy narrative and that it's hard to believe. The suspension of disbelief is quickly eroded. So, what am I getting at here? The movie is not very good, and it's not very original. And while there are some great performances in it, I can't recommend it very well. If you want to go like watch clips of it on YouTube, and if you see some clips of it and you're like, this looks good enough for me to, you know, spend an hour and a half or whatever it was, man, it's 95 minutes. It feels longer because of the pacing problems. Like if you're like, oh yeah, that looks good enough for me to kill the time on, and I like some of the actors, then go for it. Like, it's not gonna waste your time per se. But I can't say that it's particularly good or particularly interesting or particularly unique. They even set up some amount of like possibility for a sequel as well, which let's hope not. But it leaves so much to be desired. It leaves a lot on the table that it has the possibility of. It has a lot of the ingredients it needs to be a higher tier film than it is. But through whatever combination of money, writing, direction, and whatever else, it really face plants a bit. It at least like stumbles and scrapes its knees like over and over again. Anyway, I won't torture that metaphor anymore. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. Leave me your thoughts if you have seen this movie, or any of the ones I've mentioned before. I mentioned otherwise, if you agree or disagree. Yeah, I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.